We are now recording. This is, in case this wasn't the one you wanted to come to, this is the one about should disciples do social justice? A lively discussion and presentation is what I said. But, sorry, I'm still letting people in. I would like for us to open up with prayer, if that's all right with everyone. I consider this type of conversation to be holy and to be sacred in the sense that people will speak their hearts and their minds. Even though we're recording, I really want you to speak your hearts and your minds. I think it's important that however you feel about any part of this conversation that we have, you're not the only one that feels that way. So if everybody on this, conversation is headed in one direction and you really feel a different way, please speak up. This is a safe and good place to do that because you're among people that love you. So you can't go wrong. But let's open up with prayer. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks that we are able to gather together, even if it is virtually. We are seeing each other's faces, we're hearing each other's voices, and in that we find much comfort and a little bit of normalcy. We ask that you come and be with us and pour your spirit upon us as we discuss social justice and what it means to be a believer in you and a follower of Jesus Christ. We ask for your spirit of wisdom, your spirit of courage, and most of all, your spirit of love to surround us. It is in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. I actually have a screen to share with you. And I'm going to go in between sharing the screen and not sharing the screen because I want us to be able to see each other's faces too. And it's kind of hard when all of a sudden I share and unless you're scrolled over on the side. Do you have everybody over on your side by chance? And I keep losing my mouse. Yeah, you might have to scroll down. This is Should Christian Church DOC, and I put laity and clergy engage in social justice work? If we should, what should we do, and how should we do that? And of course, the big question is if. I think the rest falls into place once we decide if it is something that we should do or not. So, first thoughts. Just what are your first thoughts about that? Right off the top of your head. Should clergy and laity, or should just clergy or just laity? What are some of your first thoughts?
My first thought is absolutely. My interpretation of the Bible is that Jesus was always involved in social work and helping others, social justice. And but sometimes some of that work looks to other people as political and then becomes sometimes maybe a divisive topic within the church.
Well said.
Sorry, what, Mary?
I said, well said.
Very well said, yes. Other first thoughts?
Like, kind of like Lisa, there's teaching or things that I read and interpret in, especially the New Testament, in how Jesus approached his world, how he approached everybody around him, that really feels like social justice to me. And yeah, it can be difficult when others read that differently, or when they start to see it as political versus something that really is about being able to see the divinity in everyone. That if we're all created in God's image, then that means everybody, which is what I wind up coming back to as part of that. But
right. Thank you, Anna. Others? There are no wrong answers, by the way, just so you know.
Oh, sure, Laurie. Then I'll give my answer and I go, no, wrong.
Well, I will to you, but
I know. See, I told you.
I'm just waiting for somebody that I can go, oh, you are so wrong. No, Kirsten, I won't. No. What is your answer? Do you have one? You don't have one? Yes, you do. I know you. I don't know if it's the color that I used for this keynote, but I can't find my mouse. So it's lost somewhere. It's there, but it's lost a little bit. So if someone else doesn't have anything to share, I'm going to move on to the next slide, and it might help our conversation along. All right, what is social justice work? Is social justice work different from loving neighbor? So what I've done is I've taken what the secular world as well as the religious world would call social justice work, activities, agendas, whatever word you want to use, and put that against loving neighbor. Is social justice work different than loving neighbor?
Well, I think loving neighbor is the start. And then social justice work is working on systems and laws that will then help us to love our neighbor and provide for our neighbor better than what our systems and laws do now.
Okay. Other conversations, other thoughts on that?
I say along the same kind of lines, that loving neighbor feels more passive, whereas social justice work is more active.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's easy to just sit back and say, oh, sure, I love my neighbors, but not do anything about it.
Right.
I think loving neighbor is a broader term.
Say more about that, Mary.
Well, I'm not talking about the next door neighbor. I'm talking about neighbors around the world.
Right.
And social justice is needed in part of it. Some of the immediate kinds of things with loving neighbor is food.
Mm-hmm.
Social justice is more long term. You're trying to change things, and it takes more time. It takes a lot of effort. While satisfying immediate needs of the neighbor, feeding them, clothing them.
Kind of mold, Whole mold doesn't taste good, but blue cheese mold does.
If y'all will mute
No,
yourselves
this doesn't taste good.
unless you're talking. I'm not sure. I can't see who that was. All right, go ahead, Mary.
Well, I was about finished anyway.
Oh, okay. You were doing a beautiful job, so I didn't want you to finish.
Well, I was, social justice is a different animal than feeding and clothing and whatever else, meeting immediate needs of that neighbor.
Okay. All right. So y'all, go ahead. Go ahead.
You need to do both. I don't know whether it's just two things or whether it's more than that, but that's the two things I think about.
Yeah. And there probably are more. I simplified this down on purpose. So for us to have a beginning spot of what does social justice work entail? So what I'm hearing is that social justice work entails changing laws and policies.
Yes.
And loving neighbor.
Standing up for your neighbor too.
Standing up for your neighbor.
Yeah,
I think the key word is.
Go ahead.
I think the key word is justice in there.
Is that Pat saying that?
Yes, that's Pat.
Okay.
There's social work.
Right.
But we don't call them social justice workers.
We don't, do we?
People that do so. I'm involved somewhat in that because I'm a CASA.
Right.
And, you know, it just, you're usually working with, so when I say, so I'm just thinking that there's a difference between social work and social justice work. And I do like what somebody said about one being a loving neighbor and doing action.
Mm-hmm. So, Pat, you bring up a good question. Is social work, I mean, what you do with CASA, I would call social justice work as well as social work, because you are
Well, it is.
up for.
I am court appointed, and it involves our justice system.
Right. But can social work be social justice work? I know you didn't think the questions were going to be this tough at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, I think social work can be social justice work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, especially when you're in that role of advocating for somebody who hasn't had equity in, true equity in society or in the system that they're within. If you as a social worker are, advocating on their behalf or advocating with them, definitely it is.
Right. Right. Other thoughts? Somebody? I think somebody was about to talk.
I think that word system is key. I heard Anna say system, and that seems like part of it too.
Yeah, because to me, social justice work isn't just about policies. It's also about changing culture and changing systems. And that's more than we can do just with changing laws, because you have to change how people are thinking, how they're approaching their world, how they're thinking about, anything from where they buy their house to, who they want as their neighbor.
Right. So, but a lot of this has to stem out of caring, right? So
I think too, there is an element when you think about changing the system, there is an element of fear involved for many people. And it is, can you think of ways to help your neighbors who are fearful to understand and not be so fearful of others that they find different from them?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The word that strikes me is work. Now, it's possible because it's dead center that I can it.
That may have been on purpose too.
Yeah, exactly. But the work, it's something that I need to take on intentionally. It's not sort of a, oh, by the way, and well, yeah, of course I love my neighbor, so I can chip in extra for such and such. But it's work that people need to do to be able to get all this to happen.
Right. I didn't necessarily mean to go on to the next slide. Y'all think I'm kidding, but I really have no idea where my mouse is. My mouse knows where it is because it changed the slide, and I was able to let Ann in, so I'm able to do that. But I don't know. I've never had this happen before, and of course it would happen when I'm my own tech person, right?
Have you tried the arrows on the keyboard?
Yeah, that's how I accidentally changed to the, and then I tried to go backwards and it wouldn't let me.
Well, Ophelia heard your voice and had to come.
Oh, good,
see you.
good. Hi, Ophelia. So I'm going to move us along since the slide is there, and I don't know if you can see the whole. Can you see the whole slide?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Because I can't. Is social justice work political? I just happen to know what it says. So what is politics? The set of activities that, oh man, a typo, that are associated with making decisions
In groups.
in
You should be able to
groups.
minimize your people.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I
Okay.
can't find my mouse.
But
It's
the
okay.
mouse won't do it, yeah.
Yeah. the
I'll
mouse
read
won't
it to
do
you.
Thank you.
Politics, a set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations between individuals, such as the distribution of resources or status.
Right. So that's what politics is supposed to be anyway. Set of activity. Oh, it's really bothering me, that typo, sorry. That are associated with making these decisions in groups. So is social justice work political?
Can be.
Can be, in what way?
Well, in that you work to change the systems or the laws that are creating injustice.
Okay.
But I think you can also have social justice work that you do that is maybe not political, and what's your personal activities that make life better for others and more just.
Can you give an example of what that would be that would not be political?
Well, I think people who, like, say, go into prisons and are advocates for prisoners.
Right.
In some ways, if you're an advocate even in a school for a child that has a situation that is not healthy for them, or there's things that you can do that don't kind of hit the political realm, but things that you can do that are trying to make things better, more socially justice for
Right,
people.
right. Okay, thank you for.
I think necessarily it kind of needs to be political because there's power involved, and power makes the laws, power makes the systems that work, and it says the distribution of resources or status, and it's basically political that determines the distribution of resources. And if you need them for social groups, it needs to be political.
I think to make change, you probably have to have it be political, but I think on an individual basis, I mean, if you can do something for, say, a child who's being bullied or something like that, you're probably not going to change laws there, but as an individual, you can make a difference.
Right.
Well, and then there are some things too, like, I'm thinking again about, here in Minneapolis, there's been a lot of fuss about what's called the 2040 plan, and a lot of it is looking at how we rethink housing and access to housing in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis in particular, and looking at neighborhoods like mine that were heavily redlined, and some of that work that needs to be done for equity and for social justice. And when it comes to access to housing, access to good neighborhoods, having good neighborhoods across the city, that's very definitely political. But you can't do that political work with also making social change. That's not necessarily political. I think about my neighbors who were looking at the 2040 plan, and I don't want an apartment building in the, that's going to go up right behind me. It's going to change my garden. Well, maybe, but think about, how that, beyond just your garden, how that can also provide equity for somebody else. So you sort of have to have that piece of it that is policy, but also that piece of it that is changing how people think, kind of changing the hearts and minds along the way too.
Right.
My daughter and I were out driving today, and we came by Pamela Park in Edina, which is part of what is happening in the eastern, well, actually all over Edina, but where they're tearing down affordable houses and building really big houses.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole question about, are we going to have a community that's inaccessible to people who work here? that's a political question. I think, you know, it has to be answered by our city council and what they're going to do. But it's like, who's going to be able to afford these McMansions that they're building?
Well, and what's happening in Minneapolis too with the question of affordable housing is affordable housing kind of got concentrated in a couple of places and not always in a way that made sense. You know, and that plays back into that policy of where do we put, not only that we're creating that affordable housing, but where we put it and how we think about it.
Power is a huge part of all this too. Who holds the power? Who gets to decide?
And
You
the
know, and
money.
some of social justice is figuring out how does that power get shared among more people, and you know, those that are not typically represented.
Right.
I think one of the questions that we're dealing with as a community is, so if it's just left to the power and the powerful and the money, the affordable houses are gonna keep coming down. So is the answer to build apartments that are more affordable? And where are you gonna build them? Because as you said, people don't want an apartment building in their neighborhood. Or are you gonna do something to keep those affordable houses available? Still undetermined what we're going to do.
But even in that, it also determines taxes and money and power and schooling. And I have a hard time thinking about when I bought my house, which was not quite 20 years ago, I guess. I just wanted to be in a good neighborhood, and good neighborhood generally means quiet, nicer homes, white people. And so I've rethought about that a lot, and I'm considering, I haven't talked Tony into it yet, but I'm considering moving maybe into a neighborhood with more color to it. Not necessarily a certain neighborhood yet, but a neighborhood with more color, as long as I'm not accused of gentrification or anything like that.
Right.
Well,
but
the other thing is, could other people of color move into your neighborhood?
They are.
When we moved here, there were covenants. Couldn't be black, couldn't be Jewish, and own a house here. Those are gone, unfortunately. And now I see my neighbors are black, my neighbors are Indian, and it's a celebration of that diversity is really wonderful.
Yeah, my neighborhood now has more. We have Burmese next door, and we have an African family. When I look at their clothing, I'm kind of thinking Nigeria, just a kitty corner from us. And then around the corner are more Asians, but I don't know them personally, so I don't know what country they're from. But I do appreciate that, actually.
So that to me is part of the answer to solve some of the issues, that if you have neighbors that look different from you, that you're not afraid of, and that you recognize their culture. If we had more of that, we would, as I said, I think a lot of what drives some of the craziness that we have going on is fear.
Oh yeah.
You're not fearful of those people. You realize that they're wonderful people.
Right. And unless you're told to be fearful, right?
Yes.
Right.
I was raised in a racist household, so it's been an interesting journey.
Yes. And I'm glad you've taken it. Let me put it. Very glad you've taken the journey.
I'm not sure that I'm totally there.
I don't know.
I'm hoping that I am. I think there's a lot I don't understand. I don't understand all cultures.
Right. I only did the slideshow to that slide on purpose about is it political? Because I wanted to hear what you had to say and keep reminding you that what we do as followers of Jesus Christ, if we claim Jesus, is we are called to love neighbor as self. And if we're loving neighbor, and that leads us to social justice work, Is it political?
And is it being political a bad thing? I think that's sort of what we're implying here. And is that bad?
And what do we really mean when we say, I'll just say it, you know, for me, if people at First Christian said, well, Laurie's just being too political, what are they really saying? What does that mean when that's said? Or, you know, Deb is just being too political in what she's doing with the children. If somebody was to say something like that, what do you hear in statements like that?
I hear I don't agree with you.
Right.
What
Yep.
I hear.
I think
Taking
part of the
sides.
problem, I think part of the problem is that our country has gotten so divided over what we call politics, which may or may not truly be what politics are supposed to be.
Right.
And we've turned everything into an us versus them amongst ourselves in our own country. And by that, ourselves includes all kinds of different people. But within this country, we've turned ourselves into this us versus them mentality. So when people say something's too political, it is about taking sides. It's about, you know, what somebody said, I disagree with you. And they also feel, what's the word I want? I mean, challenged sort of in their own views, like, you know, you're saying that I'm wrong or something.
Right.
That ends up being a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see this as a lot of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of I'm going to lose my gun, or fear of I'm whatever. I don't know. I just wonder how we get rid of that. To me, it's like, how do you get rid of that fear?
Mm-hmm.
I think that we only call it political if we don't agree with it. If we agree with it, we say, oh, that's a great idea.
That's very true. That's very, very true. Deb?
When you think about it, Jesus was put on the cross for political reasons.
Right.
Now, we have religious implications from that, but he was arrested, tried, and convicted and executed as a political criminal. So, you know, that I don't know that I've ever heard this as an argument, but, you know, Jesus was political in other people's views. He may not have thought it's politics, and I'm, you know, guessing love one another was where he was coming from, but other people viewed it as political. So, you know, I think it does boil down a lot to if somebody says, well, you know, that you're being political, well, that may be your view, my view. I'm trying to create justice because of my belief and wanting to be a follower of Jesus.
And by the way, Deb, nobody has said that. That's why I made
I know.
that. Okay. I just thought I better clarify that. Nobody has said that. I made that statement up so that, you know, to get the conversation going. I used you and me for that.
If somebody had said that, you would have told me just so that I would know whose head to go
I don't
take.
know how you can be political at day camp, but no, you're right. And so what if, I agree with your statement. What if, what do we need to do then? Or I may be making too big of a leap. I may need to take one step. If I believe that standing up for Black Lives Matter, if I believe in my heart that I'm doing that out of love of neighbor and the gospel, but other people see it as political. Let's say all of us, we're at a Black Lives Matter rally and we're doing it because we love neighbor. And then there's a whole other group of women at this retreat that are at an All Lives Matter rally that's competing with Black Lives, saying, no, it's not just Black Lives, it's all lives matter. there's not too many people who would argue that all lives matter, right? But there's a reason why we're saying Black Lives Matter, because for so many years, Black lives have not mattered. And they, you know, with Breonna Taylor and other issues, it could appear that that's still true. So how can we have a conversation with someone where we're really coming out of the love of God, or we believe we're coming out of love of God, following Jesus, and that the gospel proclaims us as Jesus went around and welcomed people in and broke every law that there was out there. Not every law, but just about. How do we have a conversation, or how do we let people that think we're being political, but also saying all lives matter is pretty political too? I mean, what Kirsten was saying about there's such a divide in the country that you can be on either side of that issue and be looking at each other thinking you're being political, and both are coming out of what they believe to be maybe love of neighbor. I don't know. I can't speak for sides that I'm not necessarily on, because I don't know. Do y'all understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think when you say, I don't know because I don't think that way, that's when we lovingly ask, why do you think that? You know,
Okay.
and we try to get to an understanding, and you know, I think that the well-placed questions, not accusatory questions, can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we first seek to understand, you know, the Stephen Covey 7 Habits.
Right.
But we first have to seek to understand why, if they've made the comment on that I am for Black Lives Matter, if they've made a comment, I guess the question is asking, why did you not like that? Or if they have just proclaimed all lives matter, I'll say, why do you say that? You know, I think that a loving questioning.
May I suggest that you don't use the word why? It immediately brings people hackles up.
Sure. That's a good point, Linda.
It's funny how much language makes a difference when how you approach the idea. I don't know. I have a number of people that I know that are on a different political plane than I am, and it's very hard for me to understand.
Yeah.
I keep trying.
If you approach it with talk to me more about, I think back to a childhood friend of mine that reconnected with on Facebook, like you do, and he and I had a few discussions, one in person actually, when I ran into him in the neighborhood when there was the Vote No campaign a few years ago in Minnesota. And he is conservative, and and so we had a bit of a discussion about why it was that he felt strongly that our Constitution should say that marriage is only between one man and one woman, and I explained why I felt otherwise. But yeah, coming at it from talk to me more about allowed me to really learn more about why he thought that way, why he felt that way, that why he felt so almost dogmatic to my mind, as I was first thinking about it, with his very Catholic conservative faith, but being able to, but approaching it as talk to me more about also means that we didn't just wind up yelling at each other. And he said to me later, we still don't agree, but I appreciate that you took the time to learn.
Which is the way we should be in the United States of America, right? Able to have the conversations, and we're not always going to agree on everything ever. Yeah. I mean, we're just not going to. But if you know where somebody's coming from their faith, from their love of God, love of neighbor, or some other, wherever it is that they're coming from, their foundation, that helps us understand. Go ahead, Kirsten, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think where people make a point of it became political is if you look at the politics being changing systems, or the systems or laws or whatever. I think there are lots of times, not in the example Anna just gave, but there are lots of times when people have a basic common belief about something. I mean, okay, I realize there's a contingent of people who would in fact tell you emphatically that Black lives don't matter.
Right.
I understand that. Putting those people aside, the rest of us who might disagree on how to make a statement on that, there are very few who are going to out and out make a racist comment about how they don't really give a darn whether a Black person lives or dies. I mean, most people aren't going to say that, but they might have a really different idea about what does it really take to make a difference in our society. Maybe we're coming
Right.
at the same problem from very different angles of what's really the right decision, you know, or the right systems or whatever. And oftentimes, if we try to find the common denominator, what do we agree on? Let's start there. And then look at then where do we diverge from that? It helps to at least try to have a conversation with people, because often there is still a common denominator somewhere. And it might even be with some people who we really disagree a lot with. It might actually come down to our Christian faith, where,
That's right.
you know, they're coming at something very much from their Christian faith. Okay, I can respect that because mine's pretty strong too, you know. So how do you understand your Christian faith? You know, here's what I think about what it means to be Christian. But if you can find that common denominator and try to have a conversation, then it doesn't become quite so divisive. And maybe you aren't going to agree on what's the best political way to change something, but maybe you can together find a different way.
Right. Or at least begin to understand why someone is, you know, fighting for something in a certain way.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Have we lost the art of compromise
Oh yeah.
somewhere?
Oh yeah, I think
I
so.
mean, it just,
Well, we have, because, you know, when you think about it, our political leaders used to do a lot of compromising. I'll give you this, you give me that. There was a lot of conversation across the aisle and working things out, and maybe they still didn't agree, but they were okay with letting this happen as long as they got something else they wanted, that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen at all anymore. There's zero cooperation between our political leaders, and that's the example we now see throughout our society in politics. It's the example. This is how we treat one another. We just yell and scream at one another and don't make any attempt to understand or compromise. We have lost that. That's the example we're getting on a daily.
Right. The
right.
and there was also, you know, when I think about Alexander Campbell, y'all know him. We don't know him personally, but we know him. When I think about Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone, and I think about, and I read their debates, and especially Alexander Campbell, oh my gosh, I think he would have been a little bit like Paul, like in the Bible, Paul. The debating that Alexander Campbell loved to do. But that's what people would do. They would get up and they would, you know, share what they're understanding, and somebody else would share, and then somebody else would share. And, but he debated a lot of what we today would call political issues. We would say, Alexander Campbell's being a little too political. He better watch it, you know. But that was, but what he was debating was based on what he believed the gospel calls us to do. And so that's where it starts getting so convoluted, because I believe, this is just my belief, I believe that we as the church, not just the Christian church, disciples of Christ, but maybe mainline Protestantism, allowed a very political, see, I use that word, and I'm not using it in a good way, political, right, religious group to kind of, I'm just going to say it, get in bed with politics, get in bed with the politicians, that they're the ones that are kind of controlling the narrative of what is said and about how people should live as Christians. They have created what Christianity is, they believe, is supposed to look like, and it's really based on a lot of power, a whole lot of power. And so whenever those of us not just clergy, laity, whenever we begin to speak up from our Christian beliefs to a different narrative than that one, then that's when we're considered, you know, too political, even though over here has been just as political. We've all been political. And so I really believe that we as laity and clergy within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ are called to proclaim something. And that proclaiming of will put us into the political realm, because Christianity has somehow merged, melded, whatever, with agendas, with political agendas, instead of just being its own agenda, so to speak, right? You know, where Republicans may have stood for something on one thing, and you're thinking, oh, I agree with that, and Democrats would have, oh, I agree with that, but I disagree with them on this, and we've lost all of that. And I think it's time that we as church begin to speak again. I believe William Barber's doing that through the Poor People's Campaign. He will not endorse a candidate. He's not going to endorse a candidate. Poor People's Campaign does not support a particular candidate, because whoever gets elected president, the Poor People's Campaign is going to call them to the same task. Doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. They're going to be called to the same task of caring for the poor. And I appreciate what Reverend Liz and Dr. Barber have done. Well, Dr. Liz too, what they have done in kind of putting that Christian message of caring for the least of these in the forefront. And I think it's a model and a way for us to begin to see how we can do this work, which I know can cause problems in churches. I just happen to serve a church that is not in Mississippi. I'll just put it that way. Where I came from, and I'm just so very grateful. But I serve a church that has been active and is loving and kind. And all of you, by the way, I know your churches are members of very loving and kind churches. And so I think we have an opportunity to make a difference. How do y'all feel about what I just said?
I think it's interesting because among our church, we have members, sometimes they don't speak out, but they don't necessarily agree with some of the political opinions in that. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't love those people as much as you love somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But how do we then, as churches, as a region, how do we, as you know, as churches within the same region, how do we address some of what we would call the ills of society? How do we address immigration and what's happening? How do we address what ICE is doing, of going in?
We don't, as a church, have to decide that. We could decide that as individuals.
Right. But does the church play a role in speaking to these issues? Let me ask that question.
I think it can. You know, I think about the churches that have put out statements, or, you know, the whether it's DOC or another denomination that has put out statements talking about immigration and what ICE has been doing, or you know, the various things that over time denominations have spoken out for or against, you know, and said, as a Christian church, we believe X, and so therefore, you know.
Well, my little church is a little rural church. And our congregation, I would say, is split half left, half right. So what they tend to do is then focus just on their community within themselves rather than the outer world. And I don't think that even our church could take a stand on, as a church. We can't say, First Christian Church of Creston, Iowa says that we stand for Black Lives Matter, because we would be split enough. I think that numbers can say it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other thoughts on this? It's a tough
I
subject.
think having a dialogue, if you could have one, to discuss the reasons that people would think that Black lives didn't matter would be interesting. And as you said, well, they'd say all lives matter, but
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really difficult when, if you say Black Lives Matter, and then there's this immediate pushback as if when you say that, then we're against the police.
Right.
You know, that just kind of like, no, didn't say that.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
That's another case though of allowing a different group to define what that means, just like what Laurie was saying before about having allowed a group to define what it means to be Christian, when a whole lot of us Christians don't agree with what they say it means to be a Christian. And the same thing with that, you know, we need to speak up more, because there are groups that have defined what that means, like what you just said. If you say you're for Black Lives Matter, oh, then you don't like the police. No, you know, we have to really be vocal about, that's not what I'm saying here. Here's what I am saying. And, you know, that's, it's one of those things that comes down to being able to have conversations, which are so difficult to have these days with people that disagree with us, because people aren't listening. And it also comes down to respect too. And I think about this a lot on like the abortion issue, people who have very different opinions on the whole situation with abortion, all the politics, I'm going to say, of abortion. You really have to, instead of just fighting one another, I mean, we have to stop at, okay, what exactly is it? Because people have very strong, very deep, very religiously grounded reasons for where they come down on that issue. And if we don't respect what they're saying and just tell them they're wrong, whichever side you're on,
right,
then all we're doing is fighting. And you have to be able to say, okay, I disagree with that, but talk to me, tell me what it is, and then actually respect their opinions when they share them.
Do you feel, and I don't mean you, Kirsten, I mean everybody, do you all feel comfortable in being able to base how you feel about something out of the gospel? Do you feel comfortable being able to say what drives my life or defines how the lens through which I view the world is love of neighbor, or Micah 6:8, love justice, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God, or some other scripture? I mean, I'm just, Matthew, when you did this to the least of these, you know, you did this to me. Do you feel comfortable in being able to claim that your understanding, whatever it is, it may not be like mine, but whatever your understanding of what it means to live as Jesus taught us, or maybe we might believe God wants us to live a certain way. Do you feel comfortable being able to use that as your strength to have those conversations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually thinking about one friend of mine who was a college buddy and was concerned when concerned in a way that was sort of obnoxious, actually, when I said, yeah, I've started going to church again. And he was worried, and he was thinking, oh, she's all of a sudden become this conservative Christian. I said, no, wait a second, John, back up. Here is my reading. Here is my understanding. This is how I read the Bible. And what's funny is now he introduces me to new friends as, this is my friend Anna. She's a good Christian.
We need to get you a t-shirt that says I'm a good Christian. Yeah.
I'm a good Christian. But I think, because he had such negative understandings himself of what the Bible could be or how it could be used, being able to say, no, this is how I read the Bible. This is my understanding of Micah, of Matthew, of, yeah, Paul was a little bit off the deep end. We'll allow for that. Wouldn't want to sit with him at a dinner party, but
Yeah.
okay. But here is what I've taken out of it, and it does help to be able to say, yeah, this is here the same way that these other things that other people are reading are here.
Right. And I do believe that the Christian Church Disciples of Christ has a wonderful message to proclaim. I just, yeah, I've been disciple my whole life, so maybe that's why, right? But I really believe we have a good message to proclaim. But if we don't, if we're not out there in the arena of the world and proclaiming a message that's different than like your friend would have heard, Anna, thinking that you were over in some other realm of Christianity, if we're not doing it, then we are allowing other people to speak for us and to define what it means to live as a good person in this world. And I do think it's important that we engage in transparency. Those of you First Christian already know how I feel about this, but I think it is important for us to engage in what others may consider the political world.
Hey, Laurie.
Yeah.
One thing about the disciples that always remember, my mother grew up in like Church of Christ or kind of non-denominational, but comment that I always remember is when they came to Mankato, they went to the disciple church, and she says, it really was the first time I've heard love preached from the pulpit. That has really made
That's good to hear. Yeah.
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 And I have been in 5 disciple churches in my life, and that has held true through every one of those churches.
Right. Yeah, I do think we have a message of love, and I think we have a message of caring for the least of these. I think we love our neighbors, and when it comes to those hot button political issues, if we approach it from our faith, then we begin to see it's not as much a political issue as maybe it's a moral or religious issue for us. That I may feel so strongly about Black Lives Matter that I can't do anything but work that. That's obviously I do my job. I'm not just doing that. I didn't mean that to sound like that, but there could be something that just consumes you because you see that no one else is speaking up, or you don't feel as if anyone else is speaking up. So I encourage you to find ways, whether it's your prayer life, or you do go to a march or a rally, or you do vote in a certain way. Everybody should vote, and your vote is your vote, and you vote any way you want. Just do it. Just participate in the world, so that we can, in whatever way, create a world that's a little more just, a little more loving, and we're not putting laws into effect that are harming people, but are making life better. And that in itself is social justice that comes out of our love of neighbor. So I hope y'all have enjoyed this discussion, and I know for some of you it's just singing to the choir, preaching to the choir, singing to the choir, but I think it's good for us to talk about these things and realize our role as citizens in the world, but also as followers of Jesus Christ. So, and I just have to ask one more thing. Pat, how's Big Al?
Big Al is slowly getting better, but in just talking to my brother Mark, who's a retired doctor, and Al asked him, he says, well, how long is it going to take to recover from this? And Mark said, a couple of months. So we got to go.
Well, we're going to be praying for him. So and give him a hug for me. Okay.
I sure will.
All right.
I told him you were but he wouldn't come.
Okay. I wouldn't come
Show
if
you his
somebody told
car.
me I was on here too. All right, everybody. Thank you so much and see you soon. Right?
Thank you, Laurie.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Laurie.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.